My name is Nader Haram, and I'm a performer, first and foremost. I'm an Arab American, Lebanese American. I think I'm more known for a band named Haram, which I sing in Arabic. It's more of like a punk rock band. I don't identify as a Muslim currently. I take that really seriously. I think that like if I'm gonna identify as a Muslim, I'm gonna pray 5 times a day, I'm gonna fast during Ramadan. But I was a practicing Muslim, a practicing Shia Muslim for most of my life. I'm very spiritual, like I still align myself with like a lot of the moral values of the Quran and Islam. I'm very connected to it. I remember that day, like shot by shot, like scene by scene. I feel like it was really traumatic for me, and easily one of the most like traumatic things for me in my life. It kind of felt like a loss of innocence for me. I was in 5th grade. I was taken out of class randomly, and I was the first one taken out of class. It was a Catholic school, and I was taken to the principal's office, and he started asking me all sorts of questions, like if my parents forced me to pray at home, if I was like forced to learn Arabic, where my parents were, did they argue, what was life at home like all these really intrusive questions. I remember like feeling really confused. I thought something happened to my parents. My mother ended up coming to get me from the school, and that's when she told me, all about what had happened. I remember going home and we were just watching it on TV, and that was like the first time I had seen violence on that scale. And I think as a collective experience, a lot of us, like that was the first time we had ever seen something so like, destructive. Especially on television. It was really the years after that it affected me. And I was already like kind of tokenized as like the Muslim kid in school, and like the school like had very few like people of color and minorities. I had never really experienced bullying, at least of the racial kind, I was kind of overweight when I was a kid, and like I would get a lot of bullying like that. But that's when I started getting like picked on for my culture and my race and my identity. It was just a lot of like serious bullying and name calling and physical abuse, and it was very traumatic for me. I've always had a lot of identity problems because of that time. I felt like I had to like change who I was to be liked because I had this like internalized like abuse happening because of my culture and identity. I always felt like I had to like present myself a certain way so that people wouldn't see that side of me. Growing up, like my family wasn't too keen on like being open about like where we're from, stuff like that. It was a scary time in that time period, and like 2001 to like 2008, I would say. Through subculture specifically, like I've been able to ground myself in an identity that I chose, and I think it still comes up. Like I still have to go to therapy, and I still have to like deal with like pretty serious issues from time to time. But I think for the most part, I'm grateful for where I'm at now. I grew up in South Yonkers, and I grew up around like hip hop and rap and all sorts of other types of music. I never got into punk. It wasn't until like late high school that one of my friends like exposed me to a lot of like the punk that was happening in Brooklyn. I remember like the first show I went to, and like I remember being like, everyone looked so beautiful, like I loved everything about it, like the aesthetic, and then the music was just like so emotional and like raw and like very real, and that's like really what I appreciated about it the most. I had this like forbidden fruit complex like growing up too, like anything that like because Islam is very strict, and like I think like growing up Shia Muslim, especially in America, is like a very specific experience, and I think that it just forced me to want things like I couldn't have, in terms of stuff like that. Like I'd sneak out and buy like a CD from Tower Records or some shit, and like go home and listen to it secretly, like I would do stuff like that like all the time, and like sneak out to shows. When I was exposed to punk specifically, like my brand of punk, and like in Brooklyn, and the community I'm from, like it changed my life. Like I owe my life to those people. When I first started singing in Haram and I started singing in Arabic, like I feel like the first reaction was like a lot of people being like, what is this? Like what, like so many questions, like an overwhelming amount of questions that I was trying to like, answer as much as I could. My parents were pretty like proud people, like they would always, tell people where they were from, and like, we're from Lebanon, we're Muslim, For me, I always felt really shy about that. And I always felt like that I had to hide that aspect of who I am because I didn't want to get judged. And I think especially after 9/11, you would get judged. You know, if you said, I'm Arab, I'm Muslim, it's like you're automatically like hiding weapons of mass destruction somewhere in your house. I started to become jaded with religion in general, I think around the time 9/11 happened. It was like 5th, 6th grade. It really comes down to like me going to a Catholic school and like I'd go to church and sit down and my father would be like, hey, like sit in the back, you know, don't like participate in the mass, which is like understandable. We're a Muslim family. And then later, because Friday is the holy day in Islam, like we would go to mosque after church. And I think that juxtaposition and duality in my life around that time, just specifically on those Fridays, like eventually just made me feel like this is just all the same. And I feel like I don't trust any of it. Islam is so special to me. You know, if I'm in a bad situation, I still pray. You know what I mean? Like I don't like, it's something that I can't. It's not something that it's like I'm reliant on it mentally at a certain point. It'll always be a part of me for the rest of my life. There's like the basic, you know, Muslim prayer that goes, it starts like Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. I say that when I feel like I'm really stuck or if I'm in a hard position, you know, a hard time in life, it kind of just like relaxes me. Going to church sometimes, like that's something that I really enjoy. Like sometimes I go to like St. Patrick's Cathedral and I just sit in the last pew. I just sit there and it just makes me feel comfortable for some nostalgic reason, some sort of internal thing from my past, I don't know why. My fight was a lot more relevant a few years ago, you know, like when Islamophobia was at its peak, you know. And I see like in America at least there's like, it's always there, you know, there's always Islamophobia, but it heightens at certain points, I think according to like news media and what's going on in the world. It's such a sad scenario where like you stop paying attention to a group of people and then something happens, you know, and like now all of a sudden you're pouring your resources into it. It just doesn't feel right. As an artist, like I've been supported like, you know, through my whole time doing it and I continue to do it and I'll always do it, you know, I'll always be a part of it. And I'll never stop fighting, you know, that's gonna be my lifetime fight, like until I die, is like doing this. Like fighting for the people I care about and the people that I think don't deserve treatment like that, you know, and the way I was treated especially, you know. The moment I see anyone treated that way, I immediately jump, you know, and I try to help. Islamic fundamentalism has always been a problem throughout my life, you know. I'm Lebanese, my parents are from there. I spent a lot of time in Lebanon growing up. Hezbollah has always been a thing. Hamas has always been a thing in my life. The resurgence of the Taliban is really concerning to me. I think that that's going to become a hotbed for Islamic fundamentalism. The way that the American pullout happened and then now we're in this situation is like, it's just, it could happen that fast, you know, it could really just be like a blink of an eye and everyone puts their weaponry down and insurgents take over, you know, and like, I think a lot of Middle Eastern countries and Muslim countries are susceptible to this. There aren't many resources, like mental health isn't taken seriously, like there isn't like, there's a lot of things that we have an immense privilege with in a first world country that a lot of these countries don't. I could have easily been a fundamentalist. I say this all the time. And that's like, a lot of people are like, that's really scary. But like, I was raised in a particular situation and experienced a certain amount of abuse where like, that could have been my outlet. I chose music and art, you know, and I chose different ways of expressing myself and my anger and my frustrations towards the way I was treated. A lot of people don't have that privilege, you know, and a lot of people are exposed to adults that come up to them with violence and tools of violence, and they say certain things to make them think a certain way. It doesn't mean that it's an excuse for their behavior, absolutely not, but I think that the more we break down like the process of how someone becomes an extremist is in any type of way, in any faith, and this should not be pinned to one certain faith, absolutely not. I think the more we break that down, the more we'll start to understand. I never thought that it would still be this bad. Like when 9/11 first happened, I remember like 2002, 2003 being like, wow, this is really bad. Like Islamophobia. I didn't know these terms even, but I just felt bad, you know, in my own skin. I felt ashamed. I felt like I had to hide. And like what would carry me through those times is like, oh, in 5, 10 years, like things will be better, you know, like surely like there'll be things that like, you know, people do like for my people and for any oppressed person, you know, like we'll have a better way of dealing with these things, you know? And like through my life, through our time, you know, on this planet since then, people like Donald Trump were elected and like Islamophobia was at like its highest ever. And like racism and oppression and bigotry has been at its peak, you know, around the world, globally, not even just in this country. So it was a shock to me, I think, to see the way like life progressed past that. Where do I see it going in the future? I only see it getting worse. Honestly, I only see it getting worse. I see fundamentalism being a problem for a long time. I don't see anyone really, I don't trust to see anyone like break these things down and see like how we could help these people in a real way. I've dedicated my life to fighting against like jihadism and things that I know some people fall into. Find an outlet, you know, and don't succumb to things that like other people show you, you know, like think about what you're doing always, you know, and don't trust everything that you see, you know. Always ask questions. That's my biggest, like, my biggest motto in my life, and how I live my life is I always ask questions. I never just take anything that's given to me. I'm singing in English now in a punk band, which is like really new to me, and I feel like I've never sang before. That's what it feels like. It's helped me kind of like relieve this like facade that I hid behind with Haram, you know, where it was like I had Arabic lyrics and people would always ask me about the Arabic lyrics. It's kind of like there now, you know. I really look forward to playing with ISO, and Haram is gonna come back. Those people are like, you know, literally my family, and they've seen me go through so much. They've always been there for me. Punk to me is not a joke. Music to me is not a joke. I've been through some real shit. I almost went to jail. You know, I didn't talk to my family for almost 6-7 years. These are things that are like real and affect my life in a very real way. So I don't take it as a joke. You know, if I'm at a show, it's very like, you know, it's very sacred. The dialogue and the conversations I get to have with people around these subjects and around my life and around theirs, like, are what drive me. And that's what I'm going for the rest of my life, really.